Okay, so if we're looking at x squared minus 8x plus 4, and we try to factor it, we're going to think of two numbers that multiply to 4 and add up to negative 8. We should notice that there is no two combinations of numbers that multiply to 4 and add up to negative 8. So one way that we could solve this quadratic is by completing the square. Completing the square says we need a perfect square trinomial on the left-hand side, which means we have to have two factors that are the same. X plus a number, x plus that same number, or x minus a number, x minus that same number. So since we don't have one, we have to create one. The first step is to subtract the 4 over to the other side. Now we have x squared minus 8x plus blank equals negative 4 plus blank. Now let's try to figure out what numbers go on that blank. In order to get those blanks, we need to take our b term, which is negative 8, divide by 2, and square it. So we have negative 8 divided by 2 squared. Negative 8 divided by 2 is negative 4, and negative 4 squared is 16. Remember, these numbers on the blanks should always be a positive. So I have a 16 here and a 16 there. Now, I want to take x squared minus 8x plus 16 and factor it. I want to think of the two numbers that multiply to 16 and add up to negative 8. We should know it's negative 4 and negative 4. So what we did was create a perfect square trinomial, and another way to write x minus 4 is x minus 4 squared. So I'm just going to erase that and do our shortcut way. Once we fill in the blanks here, we know our ultimate goal is to get x plus or minus a number squared, because we have to rewrite it as a perfect square trinomial. In this case, we're going to look at the letters that were given in this problem, which was an x, and then inside the parentheses always goes half your b. So x minus 4. On the right-hand side, we're just going to simplify what negative 4 plus 16 is, which is 12. From here, we want to solve for x, so we're going to take the square root of both sides. When we take the square root of a squared, they cancel out because they're inverses, and what we're left with is whatever's inside the parentheses. So x minus 4 equals plus or minus radical 12. Remember, we have a plus or minus when we take the square root, especially with quadratics, because we could have at most 2 answers. So we need to take the plus and minus of that square root. From here, we're going to add the 4 over, and we have x is equal to 4 plus or minus radical 12. From this step, we have to check to see if we could simplify the radical. If we can, we must do so then. So I'm going to pull the radical 12 over on the outside and try to think of two numbers or two factors that go into 12, one being the largest perfect square that you could think of. Remember, if you can't think of the factors off the top of your head, or if you just want to double check you're picking the largest perfect square, we can use our calculator. We're going to hit the y equals button, hit the number we're trying to figure out the factors of. In this case, it's 12, and we're going to hit divide by x. From here, we're going to look at the table. We want to start when x is equal to 1 and look at the right-hand side. On the right-hand side, these are all the numbers that we're trying to look for a perfect square for. So if you're starting when x equals 1, the largest perfect square will be closer to the top. So let's start with 12. 12 is not a perfect square, 6 is not a perfect square, but 4 is. So once we see that we have a perfect square, we're going to take 4 times 3. So we have radical 4 times radical 3. Now we want to simplify even further. Square root of 4 is 2. We're left over with a radical 3. So our final answer is x equals 4 plus or minus 2 radical 3. If a Regents or a test went on to state, solve for x rounding to the nearest 10th or 100th, from here what we would have to do is tee it off so that we could type it into our calculator. So if it says to round, then you must tee it off. X equals 4 plus 2 radical 3. X equals 4 minus 2 radical 3. And then from here, you're just going to type it into the calculator. So we had 4 plus 2 radical 3. And we would write down that number and round to whichever place value it told us to. And we're going to do the same thing, but with a subtraction sign. So I'm going to change that positive sign to a subtraction sign and hit enter. And again, whichever place value they tell you to round to, that's what we must do so. Thank you for watching.